Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of The Formula. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson. On The Formula, we break down and explore the elements of achievement in world-class performers. Or in other words, I sit down with these amazing people from all over the world, and I ask them, how did they get to where they're at today? How did they achieve their professional or personal success in their life right now? A lot of the stuff we talk about is the stories behind the things that they've created or the accomplishments that they've had, the failures that they've had along the way, and the lessons that they've learned in the process. Really enjoyed this episode this week with musician Ira Wolf. I had the opportunity of seeing her at a house concert about a month and a half ago, and I absolutely loved her music. So I really enjoyed this episode this week with musician Ira Wolf. I had the opportunity of seeing her at a house concert about a month and a half ago, and I absolutely loved her music. So I've been listening to her song "Sunscreen" quite a bit. So if you're into acoustic type of music that really hits home when you listen to it, I would highly recommend checking out Ira's song "Sunscreen" on Spotify. So in this episode, we talk about the story behind her song "Sunscreen," how she became a touring musician, the advice that she has for anyone who's really lost on their path, what her songwriting process is like, and how to overcome the stress of trying to write music. Ira is a really interesting and fun person, so this interview for me was just really enjoyable, and I had a lot of takeaways. She even gave me some advice. It was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate Ira taking the time to sit down and chat with me and share a lot of her experiences and stories with our audience. So, without me talking or rambling on anymore, let's get this show rolling with musician Ira Wolf. On this week's episode of The Formula, I have musician Ira Wolf. Ira, thank you for taking the time to show up on our show today. Ira and I had the opportunity to meet each other at a house concert she was putting on up in Cedar Falls, where she just did an awesome job. I loved her music. She's a very talented musician, and really excited to have her on the show today. Ira, there was one song that really stood out, and for me, it was tough to hear because of where I was at that point in time when I saw you. It was your song "Sunscreen," and I'd really just like to hear today.
Yeah, totally. So I guess just the same story that I told that night. I live in a van most of the time. Her name's Ruby. She's a 1988 VW van again. And the first time that I was on tour in that van, I was out on the West Coast, and I went snorkeling and didn't wear any sunscreen, and I ended up with such bad sunburn that I got sun poisoning. And I didn't know what that was until I had it, but it was terrible. And I tour by myself most of the time, so I'd been alone for about 4 months at that point, and I was in the desert, and my AC had just gone out, and everything just kind of sucked. And I thought I was going to die. So I was like, all right, I'll just die alone in the desert, but I should probably write a song first. And that's kind of where some idea of, like, I'd been alone for so long. Not just that, like, tour, that, like, 4 months of being alone, but in general, I'd been single for about 5 years at that point. And, I guess it was just kind of this romanticized idea of, like, it would be nice if I had somebody around that like knew me, I guess, and knew all the little quirks about me and how to keep me going and tell me to put sunscreen on when I'm an idiot. And that's kind of where that whole song came from.
Yeah, that sounds like man, I'm just imagining what it'd be like to be laying in the back of a VW van. That's like the first thing that comes to mind as a song. It's such a good story though, because I think that a lot of times when we hear, music and hear the songs, whether that's on the radio or Spotify, we don't really hear like what the artist went through in order to come up with that. Because I think that a lot of times when we hear, music and hear the songs, whether that's on the radio or Spotify, we don't really hear like what the artist went through in order to come up with that song idea, right? Or like the inspiration behind it.
Totally. And that's kind of a big part of my whole performing style nowadays. I do a ton of house concerts, like the one that you saw. And those are kind of my favorite platform because, like you said, you don't really get the story behind anything in a lot of other venues or on the radio or whatnot. And it's fun to do more intimate shows where you can like really chat with the audience and tell all the stories behind your songs and just connect more fully than I think you can in other platforms. Yeah,
I agree. So up until about 2 years ago, I'd never personally been to a house concert, really. I mean, I'd been to a type of thing, and it's such a different experience because it's like you're almost on like, you feel like you're connecting more with the artist versus like the artist is like standing up on a stage, like, you know, doing their act and then leaving. And then you can, I mean, we had the opportunity to talk, and then Wes was the other guy there, right? Wes Kirkpatrick?
Yeah, Kirkpatrick, yeah.
Yeah, he's a great artist too. I think I'm gonna have him on probably in August or so, whenever he comes back to Iowa. So that should be a good time. Yeah, his songs are also like very heartfelt as well. So it was definitely a good show.
Yeah, it's funny. Wes is a good friend of mine, and we've done a fair amount of house concerts together. And now we just call them like the sad song sing-offs, because it's basically just like both of us dumping our hearts out about the saddest things we can come up with.
Yeah, it make you feel more human at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it. I totally agree. It's this connection of like, you know, everybody's been in a terrible place, I think, at some point in their life. And so it's kind of cool to be able to connect with someone else and realize that, you know, it's a common emotion, or to just feel like somebody gets you, I guess. That's a pretty big moment, I think. You don't feel as alone or crazy anymore when you're like, oh, wow, these other people have been through this too. It's not so bad. Yeah. Maybe not so bad is not the right word, but it's like, I can get through it. I can survive this. If everybody else, like you said, it makes you feel human. Like you're not displaced, I guess. Yeah. It's funny, like this whole part of the conversation, I gave a talk at the university a couple weeks ago, and I opened up. Like you said, it makes you feel human. Like you're not displaced, I guess. Yeah. It's funny, like this whole part of the conversation, I gave a talk at the university a couple weeks ago, and I opened up my talk. I had a conversation with someone about doing an interview, and they were like, why are you doing the podcast? And I gave them some kind of like surface level answer. I'm like, oh, you know, I just want to meet cool people and do stuff. And then he just kind of kept looking at me and didn't say a word. And I was like, shit. All right. Here's the real reason. And I told him a story. So I opened up my talk with this story. Didn't really think that much of it. I'm like, it's just how I got here. And this guy comes up to me afterwards, and he's like, I got to talk to you. And I thought he was like upset with how the talk went, because I'm like, why do you want to talk to me so bad? Usually the only time anybody wants to talk to me that badly is if they're upset. So he's like, I just wanted to say, he's like, I didn't realize your life sucked that much. I was like, whoa, hey, I have a good life, man. This is not that bad. And he's like, but you've been through a lot and still are here. He's like, man, I'm going through a really rough patch right now too. And, you know, just hearing your story, like I feel like I'm going to be okay now. I was like, oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. It's like, that's really cool. Yeah. So I feel like it's almost like the same reaction that I had when I heard your guys' music. Like I was like, this is painful, but you know, it's good at the same time. Like, you know, so how did you get to become a traveling musician in the back of a VW van named Groovy? Oh man. So many things led to where I'm at, I guess. I mean, kind of from the beginning, my entire life, I've always wanted to be a musician. My mom always said that I sang before I talked, and I did all the like opera in college and all of that. And I guess like vocals have always been my main focus, but then I started playing guitar a little bit in high school, and then after college started writing for the first time, really. And I guess sharing songs that I wrote, kind of what we were just talking about, having that connection with people, and having someone come up to me after a show where I had been very vulnerable on stage and shared, these songs that I never anticipated sharing with anyone, and having someone tell me that they connected with that was a huge moment for me. And kind of led to me wanting to be a full-time songwriter, performing artist. So when I was 22, I dropped out of college. I was going to school at first in Montana. I was studying opera, and then I transferred to Berklee College of Music in Boston. And I ran out of money really quickly, and so I dropped out, and I broke up with my boyfriend, moved back to Montana for a while, and was just kind of feeling lost, I guess, and decided I definitely wanted to be a musician, but I wasn't sure how. But I felt like I couldn't really do that in Montana. There's just not a huge music scene there. Yeah, so I decided to move, and I flipped a coin between Portland, Oregon, and Nashville, Tennessee, and it landed on Nashville. And so I kind of spontaneously ended up in Nashville, and from there, just hoped it would work out if I kept writing and kept meeting people and pushing myself. And after about a year of being there, I decided to quit my day job. If I kept writing and kept meeting people and pushing myself. And after about a year of being there, I decided to quit my day job. I was working as a nanny for the first year, and I decided to quit doing that and go on the road and just see what I could do if people wanted to hear my songs. And so I went on my first tour, and that actually was, I just wrote a post about it. That was exactly 4 years ago this week that I did all that. But I did that first big tour and realized that I could survive, if even just barely, and just kept doing it since then, and upgraded from a Buick to a van than I am. And now, yeah, I just kind of stay on the road as much as I can. I actually just got the van back last, I guess, 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And now, yeah, I just kind of stay on the road as much as I can. I actually just got the van back last, I guess, 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to do that, be out of the Buick again and back in the van.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's a short, long version of where I'm at.
So I have a few questions that have come out of that. Part of me wants to hear the story of how, well, maybe not, the part where you lost Ruby for a while because she died on the road. But that was, I don't know. I thought that story was kind of entertaining. At the time, I'm sure you were just like,
are you talking about when Wes and I were traveling?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first round with Ruby, I actually didn't own the van. It was just a sponsorship from a company called Go Westy. And they let me borrow this awesome van and live in it I headed to a show in Des Moines. And all of a sudden we heard this loud pop. And Wes, in his, he's kind of his sense of humor is pretty dry. If you haven't, I mean, Yeah. But I was like, what was that? He goes, I don't know, but that's a lot of black smoke coming out of the back. And I thought he was joking because that's just how he talks. And he was not joking. And we ended up stuck in Des Moines for a few days with some engine trouble. But Go Westy got us back on the road pretty quickly. But yeah, that was, there was a few minor breakdowns during that trip. And I'm sure there will be many, many more to come. This summer, now that I actually own the van.
I love that you're like optimistic about whatever breakdowns are coming. You're like, they're going to come and it's going to just happen.
That's just part of this.
I love that you're like optimistic about whatever breakdowns are coming. You're like, they're going to come and it's going to just happen.
That's just part of this whole, like, if you live in and own a van again, you're kind of like subjecting yourself to frustration with the van. Because I mean, yeah, it's an old car.
Yeah.
Just gonna keep wearing out.
Oh man, this is probably like the whole Ruby thing is probably one of my favorite parts of your like entire story, just because I feel like, you know, when I was younger, and if something like that would have happened, I would have been like the guy on the side of the road, like, you know, like kicking the tire, like, why is this happening? And now I think I'd find a lot more humor in it, just because I'm just like, we'll fix it. Like, it'll be fine. We're gonna survive. But just your whole attitude about it cracks me up. You're just like, yeah. Just part of the journey.
I guess I've like had enough like minor meltdowns before that at this point, yeah, I just kind of expect it. And I mean, I could get upset about it, but that doesn't change anything. So I'm like, might as well just have an optimistic attitude and learn as much as I can about how an engine works. That's all I can do. And
maybe that's a good analogy or advice for life. Just understanding that, you know, shit is going to happen. And then, you know, you just kind of have to figure it out from there, like, or learn more or just keep going, you know?
Oh,
yeah. So you said something, when you're kind of just talking about your story where you said you're feeling, lost. And it sounds like that through the process of, you know, going on tour and driving around in Ruby and whatnot, you seem to have found kind of your path in music. What advice do you have for someone who maybe is feeling a bit lost on their path right now and they're just trying to find their way?
Oh man. I guess for me, I really needed to get outside of my comfort zone. That was probably the biggest change that I made. Because I think I grew up fairly sheltered in a small town in Montana, and even moving to Nashville, like that was a huge step for me. And then, you know, quitting my job and going on tour, that was, again, a giant, you know, leap of faith, I guess. And all those things were these like really overwhelmingly terrifying. So yeah, I guess the best bit of advice that I ever got was, it's called worst case scenario thinking. And essentially you anticipate if you make a move, what the worst thing that could possibly happen from that move would be. And so for me, that step was moving to Nashville. And I thought about, you know, if the worst possible thing happens after doing this, it's that my car breaks down, I don't find a place to live, I can't find a job, and I have no money, and I'm just stuck in Nashville. And thankfully, I have a really supportive family that I know I could always call on if anything ever came to that. And so my worst case scenario was that I end up stuck in Nashville. I have to ask my parents to fly me home, and then I live with them for a little while until I figure out my next move. And when you think about it that way, it's like the scenario was that I end up stuck in Nashville. I have to ask my parents to fly me home, and then I live with them for a little while until I figure out my next move. And when you think about it that way, it's like, well, that's really not that bad, realistic. Yeah. If the worst thing that can happen is that I have to live with my parents for a few months, then why wouldn't I take this step? Because the best thing that could happen is I get to live out my dream. Mm-hmm. So I guess, yeah, my best advice would be take the scary steps and work with the worst case scenario thinking.
Yeah. I think that's, you're speaking to some stuff I'm working on right now, because there's some traveling, like long-term traveling that I'm working on putting together, and I'm, going through the steps of like, all right, where am I going? Who am I staying with? How much is it going to cost? And it's like a terrifying long-term traveling that I'm working on putting together, and I'm, going through the steps of like, all right, where am I going? Who am I staying with? How much is it going to cost? And it's like a terrifying process because I've lived in Iowa most of my life, but I've traveled quite a bit. This will be the first time where I do extensively long travel to all over the world. And I'm like, all right, you can do this, and I feel like it's very important that I do that, because if I don't, and I wake up in like 5 years, it's like, you always, have you ever read the book, The Alchemist? By chance? Oh, you got to read that. It's so good. I think you'd really like it, just based on, it's one of the whole themes is like, you have to continually follow your journey, even though if you're like afraid of what's coming next, if you feel like it's the right thing to do, no matter how scary, sometimes you just have to let go and trust that everything will end up where it's supposed to, or something along those lines, So it's doing those things that like, I know that this is the right thing to do for me, but it's also like a big, scary thing. Like, okay, well, what happens if this happens? And you're like, and once you think about it and you're like, okay, well, obviously I'll just come home. it's like, oh, I guess it's not that bad then,
Totally.
Yeah. So I think that's really good advice. So let's talk a little bit about your music writing process, because you've had quite a few songs do really well. I mean, when I saw that you were coming to the house concert on Facebook, I looked you up on Spotify and I was listening to some of your stuff. I'm like, wow, she's really good. Why is she coming to a house concert in Cedar Falls? And I was really blown away by a lot of your songs. And so I'm more of your process of how it goes from an idea to a song.
It kind of depends. Every song is a little different. Some of my favorite tunes, like Sunscreen, happen, in 20 minutes. It just kind of is word vomit. I don't really know how those happen. I just have a small idea and I pick up a guitar and suddenly there's a song and I'm immediately confident with it and ready to share it and play it at shows. And then there's other songs like Great Divide, which is also done really well, that take a couple of years to write. So each song, I guess, has its own process, but usually it starts with one line or one lyric in general. And then I pick up the guitar and it starts with one line or one lyric in general. And then I pick up the guitar and it all kind of comes together at once. I don't necessarily write lyrics first or music first. I usually try and do both at the same time, and just whatever comes out of my brain is what ends up sticking. And then I kind of come back and edit later, I guess.
Yeah. So you kind of sounds like you kind of, I'm going to see if I can put this into the right words. Whenever like the inspiration for a song comes to you, you really kind of sit down and just kind of put it out there on a piece of paper. And then, through multiple iterations, whether that's 20 minutes or 3 years, you then kind of turn it into something that's like a real song, I guess, for lack. I guess I don't know. I was gonna say a real song, but I'm like, wait, they're all real songs. So.
Yeah, totally. It's I've never been good. Like, there's some musicians that have a really particular practice where every day they'll get up and they'll write for an hour, and I've just never been good at that. If I try and force myself to write at all, if I tell myself I'm going to sit down and write a song right now, then I absolutely will not. It's definitely a more spontaneous thing for me.
Yeah.
Which can be really frustrating because sometimes the inspiration isn't always necessarily there. Like when I was on the first tour with Ruby, there was tons of inspiration, and I wrote the entire album my latest album I wrote during that tour. But then for the last like year and a half, I guess I've just been too happy or something, and inspiration has been very fleeting because I'm not much of a happy songwriter. And so now I'm trying to get into that, like forcing myself to write, but that's really, really difficult for me.
Yeah, I can relate. I don't write songs, but I do write. I write other stuff, and I follow all these people that are either professional writers or bloggers or podcasters or whoever, and they're just like, you just got to sit down and write so many words every day. But I'm like, some days I just don't have anything to say. Like, I just really don't. And the other day, I was just taking a drive just because, it was one of those days where you needed to take a drive. And I'm driving along this road and I look over. I hike a ton. I love hiking and being outside. That's where I actually find most of my inspiration for all kinds of, like, my good and bad ideas. And I see this, like a little pond. No one's around. There's, like, some animals running around and stuff. I just sat there for, like, an hour and I wrote out this entire, like, story. And I was like, I sat at a coffee shop, like, a week earlier for 3 hours trying to force myself to write a blog post. And all it took for me was to, like, just see something that I thought looked cool, stop and take a seat and just, like, let it flow onto a piece of paper. And I was just like, why can't it be this easy every day? It's just, so I get what you're saying. Do you struggle with, like, do you ever feel like you should be or feel obligated to be producing more stuff? Or is it something where you're just like, I don't know. It's something I struggle with. So I'm kind of curious as to if you struggle with the same thing where you're like, well, I should be putting out this much or this much time in or whatnot.
I definitely do. It's become a point of anxiety for me over the years, which sucks because I've found that the less weight I put on it, the more I'm able to create. Like, I was really stressed to finish enough songs for my second album. I remember that was really, really hard for me. And then once that album was done and out, I immediately started writing again, and was coming up with what I thought was much better material, which led to the third album, which was kind of an unexpected thing. I didn't think that I would put out a record for another few years. But now that album has been out for about 6 months, I'm starting to feel that pressure again of being like, oh man, I haven't written, I've written one song in the last year. Starting to feel that pressure again of being like, oh man, I haven't written, I've written one song in the last year and a half that I'm happy with. And so the pressure keeps building where I'm like, oh man, if I want to keep this career going, because it's, it's a career at this point. It's not just a, like, outlet of expression that it used to be. Now it's my entire source of income. And that adds a lot of stress to it, I think, where now I feel a lot more pressure to keep creating and keep growing as an artist. Not only for the creative aspect of it, but for the realistic livelihood of it. So yeah, I definitely get that.
Is there anything that you do to, get yourself, that might help you become more or less like in the writing flow? I also am really big into hiking and the outdoors. I spend most of my time on tour. If I'm not at a show, I'm pretty much camping or hiking or getting into whatever national park I'm closest to. And that helps a lot. I think just being alone for me is probably the biggest thing. My mind tends to run a lot. And so if I'm with other people, that can kind of be stifled a little bit more or distracted from. But when I'm alone, yeah, a lot of I guess I just allow my brain to run more naturally, maybe. So yeah, I think being alone in nature is probably one of the bigger influences that helps me get writing. Yeah, I can I can agree with you on that one. I think it's so strange. It's like when you take that time when you're hiking or you're just thinking, I guess, for lack of a better term, or you're processing. Yeah. It's so strange how relaxing or how much clarity that brings with a lot of different things. And I think if a lot more people spent time doing that, they'd probably have a lot more clarity around what they wanted or what they were doing. Because it's when you're alone like that, at least for me, I seem to have like a very solid, like, okay, I'm clearly either following like the path that I want to be, or I'm clearly not. Like, when you're alone and you spend time out in wilderness, I feel like there's nothing to distract you anymore from yourself. So you're kind of stuck facing whatever's, going through your head at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking earlier about, you getting approached by other people asking, how do I become an artist? How do I tour? How do I become a professional musician? Yeah. So we were talking earlier about, you getting approached by other people asking, how do I become an artist? How do I tour? How do I become a professional musician? So if somebody comes up and asks you that, what's the first thing that you tell them to do?
Usually I first say I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows. I don't remember I wish I could remember who said it, but another much more famous artist said that when he's asked that same question, he always says, get a van, go on tour, see if people like you. And I guess that's pretty much accurate from what I can tell. There's definitely not a guidebook to this lifestyle, which I guess is a good and bad thing. Because there's a ton of different ways that you can go about doing it. For me, it was, we've kind of talked about just taking these random leaps and hoping that they would work out. And thankfully they did. But yeah, that's a really hard question because there's not ever one way to do it. So I guess the biggest thing is just figuring out what you want to do and doing it and hoping that people like it and finding a way to continue doing it. Yeah.
I think you did it. I think you gave a really good answer. I don't know if you realized you did, but just like taking the leap and doing it, like you just have to try. Like the first step is trying.
That's true.
Cause you're like, yeah, you just gotta take a leap. I'm like, oh, there you go. That seems like, a good place to start.
Yeah.
What you've done.
I think being vulnerable is really important. Being real, and just staying true to what and who you are is really important because I think people tend to see through any facade that you're trying to play up. But if you can just be as real as possible, I think people connect with that. And sometimes people won't, and that's going to really suck. But I think trying to let things bounce off and not taking everything too personally is really important as well, because people, especially in this modern age of technology and hiding behind screens and saying things that you probably wouldn't say to a person's face, too personally is really important as well, because people, especially in this modern age of technology and hiding behind screens and saying things that you probably wouldn't say to a person's face, people can be really, really mean. And I think if you take that personally, then it's going to be really difficult to have a long career. So you kind of just have to have a thick skin and a genuine being.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Right. Do you have any stories? You don't have to share if you don't want to, where, you've had some, whether it's, I'm trying to think of the right term, either some type of obstacle or some type of rejection, somebody not liking your work that's come up that you've had to work through?
I mean, constantly. Yeah. I mean, there's specific instances to name where it was, either, actually, no, there is one that really sticks out. I remember it was my very first tour, and I was out in New York, somewhere in upstate New York, and we played this bar. When I was first playing, I played a lot of bars, and that was really, really hard, especially because people in bars don't necessarily care about the music that's happening.
Yeah.
And when you're performing like that, this is something that's really personal to you, and you're sharing it with someone and nobody cares. That's really hard to get through sometimes. And I remember I played this show and nobody cared, and I was already feeling pretty defeated. I mean, we'd played a few shows before that where we were literally playing to a sound guy in an empty room. And I got off stage and I was like, okay, chin up. Like, you can do an empty room. And I got off stage and I was like, okay, chin up. Like, you can do this. At least there's people here. Like, they may not have been listening, but at least there was people at this show. And I was like, I can go out and just like try and pop some CDs, see if anybody will pay me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't paid for like any of these shows. It was all tips and merch. So I went out, and the first guy that I saw, I was like, hey, how you doing? He looked at me kind of weird, and I was like, I just got done playing. I was wondering if you would like a CD. And he just gave me the like most disgusted look, and he was like, no.
Oh, jeez.
I was so destroyed by that for some reason. I remember I just turned around and walked out of the bar and sat in the car and just cried because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, this is so dumb. And there's been a lot of moments like that, and booking inquiry, but we're not interested. Like, that still stings a little bit because you're like, oh man, but this is like my art. This is me. So when you're turning down my art, you're kind of saying no to me as a human. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. So when stuff like that happens, how do you bounce back from that?
Sometimes it takes me a little while. Sometimes I can just blow it off and be like, okay, I've dealt with that before. I've been told no before. And I recover pretty quickly and get back to work and think, okay, now I need to send out 5 more booking emails. Other times, if it's been, a really hard week of a lot of no's and I'm feeling a little exhausted, I just need to take a day away and focus on something else, whether it's writing or whether it's doing some yoga or going. I just need to take a day away and focus on something else, whether it's writing or whether it's doing some yoga or going for a hike or just ignoring music altogether for, as much as a couple months at a time. Sometimes that's been really necessary for me to just step away and remember the kind of main reason that I'm doing it, which isn't for other people, but for myself. And that's been pretty important.
Yeah, I'm curious about the stepping away thing because that's something I don't hear that often from people, where they're just like, yeah, you just got to throw yourself back into it. But the reason I'm pausing and thinking about it is because it's like, maybe it's important to process the lesson from whatever happened before you move on. I don't know. That's my first. But the reason I'm pausing and thinking about it is because it's like, maybe it's important to process the lesson from whatever happened before you move on. I don't know. That's my first instinct is there's something, from my personal experience, every obstacle or train wreck or good thing that's happened, there's always like a lesson that comes with it, whether that's, be remembering to take care of yourself mentally and physically. But if you don't take the time to learn the lesson before you jump into it again, it's almost like you are more likely to make some of the same mistakes or fall down again in the same way. And that's never that much fun, especially when you've done it before and you're like, I should know better. But maybe that's part of it, is just And maybe people need to heal as well when they feel some of that stuff. So,
yeah. I have the luxury of knowing that I can still eat and I can still pay rent, even if I take some time off. So in the beginning, it definitely was that idea of like, get back on the horse, get back into it, brush it off, and that was really hard, and really beat me down a lot. But I think a lot of inspiration also came from that. I was able to get a lot of material for writing from that. And now I'm fortunate to be able to now be like, okay, I'm overwhelmed and I need to take a break, and I can do that. Although maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'll get some more songs if I push myself a little more again.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, maybe you'll maybe you'll get off the interview and just be really inspired to take a walk and find a log next to a pond or something, and just throw me in the song credits somewhere. I'll just take that for recordation. Song credits somewhere. I'll just take that for recordation. Do you have a song that you've written that's been like the most meaningful to you?
I get that question a lot. Or if I have like a favorite song, I guess. And I don't know that I do. Every once in a while, I feel like I've answered the question differently every time, because depending on the week, I'm like, oh, well, this week I really connect with, whatever song, and that one means the most to me. So it kind of depends, because every song kind of has come from a personal experience. So it just depends on where I'm at the time being, which song I'm connected with the most. But I think overall, Fickle Heart has been I think I've connected with that one the most consistently over the years.
Yeah. What's the chorus line from that one? I've listened to it. I'm just trying to remember. It's, you tell me, it's your song. What's the chorus line?
That one, it doesn't necessarily have a chorus. It's kind of just a verse refrain, but it starts with my heart, my fickle heart, longs for sun and lies in the dark, aims for love and misses the mark, my heart, my fickle heart.
Yeah.
And that one, I think, has just applied to a lot of different moments in my life, where other songs were a little more specific or a little more pointed. That one seems to kind of maintain its character, I guess, over the years.
Yeah. Is there a backstory to that song, or somehow that song came to be, or I'm sure you didn't have sun poisoning again in the back of Ruby, but is there a backstory to that song, or somehow that song came to be, or I'm sure you didn't have sun poisoning again in the back of Ruby, but is there a backstory to that one as well?
Yeah, that one actually came from the whole flip the coin, move to Nashville thing. I started writing it when I was in Montana, kind of at that point where I guess I was just feeling, like I said, like a lost 22-year-old. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. And I felt like I kept making up my mind and then changing it and wanting one thing and then wanting something else. And so I started it in Montana and then kind of continued writing it during the whole transition to Nashville, and ended up finishing it in Nashville. Continued writing it during the whole transition to Nashville, and ended up finishing it in Nashville. Yeah, and then it kind of spurred the first record. That was the title track from the first album, and kind of what got me into performing full time.
Ira, what's coming up next for you? Do you have any new songs or albums that are going to be coming out soon, or are you just mostly focused on continuing pushing what you already have?
For this year, it's mostly continuing to push the new record. I will be releasing my first vinyl this spring, summer, which I'm really excited about. It'll be the vinyl of the latest record, The Closest Thing to Home. So I'm pretty stoked to have that. And then I'll be on tour. I've got the East Coast next month. So I start that at the end of April, and then material, and can start working on another record. But if not, then probably just ride this one for a couple more years.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, I'm like, who do I know that lives on the West Coast that would host a house concert?
Yeah.
So did you say you're hitting the West Coast as well?
Oh yeah, I'll be pretty much all over the country this year.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so I'm constantly hitting up my email list or my Facebook or Instagram and like, who wants to host a house show?
Interesting. I'm thinking of all my other podcast guests that I know that I'm like, who could I hit up to host Ira Wolf's house concert? Yeah, I don't know. I'll just let me know whatever city you're in, and I'll look at my list and see who I got, because I feel like most people I know are pretty cool, and they'd probably be down to host a house concert. So yeah, and I'll put in a good plug too. It was really good. Look at my list and see who I got, because I feel like most people I know are pretty cool, and they'd probably be down to host a house concert. So yeah, and I'll put in a good plug too. It was really good when I went. That's awesome. So I guess I've been skipping this like really important part of your like whole story where you're traveling all the time out of a van, right? So tell me what that experience is like. What is it like to live out of a van, Ira?
Oh man, how much time do we have? It's crazy. I love it and I hate it all the time. There's some huge upsides to living in a van, like being able to wander as much as I would like to, and waking up in a new place every day, meeting a ton of new people, kind of just having everything I own with me all the time, being able to wander as much as I would like to, and waking up in a new place every day, meeting a ton of new people, kind of just having everything I own with me all the time is awesome. It's a lot of freedom, and yeah, it's really fun overall, I guess. But I mean, there's definitely downsides. You know, we've talked about the breakdowns, and sometimes familiarity is nice. Being able to stay in one place for a little while can be a good thing, and that's not really part of what being in a van is about. And it's actually kind of changing right now. Like I said, I just got back into the van about 2 weeks ago, so I'm kind of adjusting back into van life, and I've only ever experienced traveling with someone. I'm bringing my partner with me for a lot of the summer, which is awesome. I'm really excited to share all these places that I've fallen in love with someone that I love. But again, that presents a whole new list of challenges, as you know, we get used to sharing 80 square feet of space between two people, and the dynamic of where each of us thinks certain things go, or how the van should be driven, or, you know, it's a lot of up and down. But yeah. I think that's kind of life. I guess it's maybe just life at a little bit more of an extreme, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome extreme, but it also sounds like one of those things where the good and the bad things are magnified because of how close you are to that other person constantly, you know? It's like when you probably have space, you're like, oh, that you're like,
totally.
Then you're like stuck side by side with them for extended periods of time, and you're just like, I hate it when you do that so much.
It's pretty though to be able to see all the things that we get to see. I mean, already we were just driving back. The van is currently in Utah with some mechanics because, of course, we're having a couple of issues already. But just in the first week that we were on the road, we got to go through Death Valley, Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon, and Capitol Reef National Park. And so we got to see, you know, all these magnificent places, and we wake up in our home every day in a different place with each other, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's all magnified, the good and the bad.
I feel like that's a good way to describe it. Just even when you travel with someone in a short period of time, I feel like the same thing happens. So I can only imagine when it's like, hey, we're going to go for a few months. It's going to be great. And we're living in the back of the van.
Right.
Do you have a favorite place that you travel to?
I'm pretty obsessed with Montana. I think partially because I grew up there, and so it's very nostalgic, and it's more home than anywhere else will probably ever be.
Which part of Montana?
Specifically Western Montana is my favorite. I love Glacier National Park is really fantastic. Missoula is just this wonderful home of mine. I love the town. I love the people. I love the whole environment there. Glacier National Park is really fantastic. Missoula is just this wonderful home of mine. I love the town. I love the people. I love the whole environment there. Montana is definitely a big comfort zone for me. But the whole Northwest in general is probably my favorite place to visit. Mm-hmm. I'm obsessed with mountains. And so going west means lots of mountains and desert canyons and ocean beaches, and it's just magical. I love the West a lot.
That's awesome. I couldn't agree more on all those things. It's like when you spend time in places like that, I almost feel like it also makes you a little bit more creative, or it kind of expands your perception of things. Mm-hmm. The more time you spend in those places, or the more new ones that you go to. For me, it's the new ones. I'm just like, wow, I don't even know a place like this even existed. This is so cool. Documentary, and he has exilelifestyle.com. He's been traveling full time for like 9 years or something. It's been crazy. So I've been talking to those guys and kind of put together my own plan for how I'm going to do my traveling. And I guess I'm wondering what your advice would be to someone who's like, all right, putting the plan together, they're getting ready to go. What advice do you have for him? Or me, I guess.
Oh boy. There's so much. I guess the biggest thing for me would be to take every opportunity that you can. I think it can be easy on the road to kind of slack off or give up on an idea and be like, I don't know if I really need to do that adventure. But I promise every single one is worth it. Whether it's like, I don't know if I have, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I don't think I want to climb that mountain. You get to the top and you see the view and you're like, okay, I don't ever need to sleep again. It's fine. That's been one of the biggest things for me, is just living with the idea of no regrets, and not wanting to look back on something and wish you'd done it. If you're going to travel, you might as well go as hard as you can and see as much as you possibly can, and just really dig into it as hard as possible.
I like that. If you're going to do it, just do it as hard as you can. Just go as hard as you can. I'll remember that when I'm like, I have like a rucksack and I'm on the side of a mountain or something and it's raining. I'll be like, damn it, this is not a good idea.
Within reason now, not like dangerous situations.
Right.
Within reason now, not like dangerous situations.
Right. Well, we'll see what happens, I guess. If I'm about to jump off on like a paraglider somewhere, I'll be like, maybe this is not advisable, but whatever. We'll see what happens. Well, I think that kind of wraps up the first part of our show. I just have a few standard questions that I ask every guest. The first one, is there anything that you try to do on a daily basis that you feel like, either helps you be more creative or really helps you feel like you won the day?
I am not great with routine, I will say. But if I can force myself and motivate myself to get up and do a yoga practice every day, that's always beneficial for me. Kind of clears my head, gets my body going, just makes me feel good, and then usually leads to a better day. Otherwise, if I'm on the road, just trying to get out and walk wherever I'm at and see whatever I can see. Each day, whether it's like getting up for sunrise and going and catching the sunrise somewhere, or, taking some time after a show to dig around the city a little bit. I think that helps me creatively a lot, to just be able to wander and explore, each new place that I'm in, because I'm really kind of in a new space all the time. So yeah, that kind of helps me.
Yeah. Those seem like very beneficial things to do for just coming up with inspiration, Like, You never know if you're going to see like a street sign or something where you're like, oh.
I do not read, hardly ever. I've always wanted to be really big into reading, because I thought that would be cool and it would be super beneficial for my songwriting and my vocabulary. But I do not have the attention span to read in general. I typically read very quickly, but I don't comprehend much of it. I'm not able to really digest most of what I read, unfortunately, which is very frustrating. But that said, I don't think I've finished an entire book since probably middle school, but I start a lot of books hoping that they will be the one that hook me. And the one that has meant the most in the past few years was one by Alan Watts, who's a philosopher that a friend in Nashville introduced me to. And I really enjoy listening to him overall, but I tried to The Wisdom of Insecurity.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
No, I know who Alan Watts is. I listen to his stuff all the time on YouTube, so I'm very familiar with his work.
Yeah, it's especially with someone with a short attention span, his writing can be a lot to dig through. But for some reason, I found myself putting in a lot more effort to get through his chapters, even if it meant like rereading the same chapter 4 times over, just so that I could digest a little bit of it. It was just a good book, and very relatable and interesting and thought-provoking.
Yeah. I've seen it pop up a bunch of times. Now I'm feeling like I actually have to go pick it up and read it now.
For someone that doesn't read, I'm suggesting
it must be amazing then. If you when we get off this, I'll send you over a link on I have to go pick it up and read it now.
For someone that doesn't read, I'm suggesting
it must be amazing then. If you when we get off this, I'll send you over a link on YouTube to the audiobook version of The Alchemist. That way you don't have to read it.
I love listening to books when I'm in the car, so yeah. Perfect. You just kind of have to get over the narrator's voice a little bit. It's like kind of a little cheesy. It's good. It's a great story. It's like one of the best-selling books in the world. I know I've heard of it a million times.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the gift of the YouTube link, so you don't have to go read it anywhere.
That's so cool.
All right, Ira, I really want to say thank you for having this conversation with me today. I feel like I've learned a lot just from talking with you through this, and it's given me some stuff to reflect on personally. And I'll probably listen to Sunscreen a few more. And so I'm just wondering, what message do you have for our audience today?
Kind of what we've already gone over is just, if you're going to do something, do it as hard as you can. Don't give up on it, even if sometimes it sucks and sometimes people are closing the doors in your face. If it's worth doing as hard as you can. So I guess I'll leave you with that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The Formula. And big thanks again to Ira for taking the time to share her advice and experiences with us. Now, if you'd like to listen to any of her music or check out any of her tour dates, I would highly recommend hitting up a house concert that she's going to be playing at. It was like my experience there was just a lot of fun and really cool. So I'm hoping I can catch another one. But you're going to want to head over to either. So yeah, go ahead and check out Ira's stuff and see if you can't find an opportunity to see her live in person. Now, on another note, if you think you might like or you might enjoy getting more podcasts from us, articles, free courses, find out about the online courses that we will be launching, go ahead and head over to helixacademy.co and sign up for our newsletter where we will be letting you know about all the cool stuff that we're going to have coming out and help you stay informed with what we've got going on over here. So that is a wrap for this week's show. I'm Trevor Carlson, and I look forward to you tuning in next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS. Next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS. DS.